So much. Today, I'm here to talk to you about a research project that my name is Mercedes, that Dr. Mary Ott and I have been working on about the role of power and surveillance in AI writing pedagogies. So if you've worked in education or are an educator or a student yourself, I'm sure you've had lots of conversations with friends and peers and colleagues about AI and how it's impacting your writing and your own work. So there's also been lots of research done on educator perspectives and perceptions of generative AI, but one of the things that's missing is that generative AI is not just a question of introducing a new technology into a classroom. It's asking educators to fundamentally reimagine and re-understand their roles and negotiate these new roles with students. So today, I'm here to talk to you about two participants that were part of a broader research project that Dr. Ott and I worked on. And we're going to talk about power and surveillance and its impact and effect on the ways that students and teachers understand themselves, their students, and also what it means to teach writing. So this project was guided by research questions around ethical considerations and writer development. Dr. Ott had questions about these, particularly in secondary and post-secondary contexts. And we recruited 39 participants, which included high school educators, college and university educators, language tutors, community language partners, across a really wide range. And we conducted semi-structured interviews and did emergent analysis based on constructivist grounded theory. And we were sensitized by our own educational and sociological orientations to writing, which included critical literacy and technology, as well as language development. So Dr. Ott and I met weekly to talk about our findings and to refine sampling analysis, and we also met with a broader research team to do that. So I'm going to introduce you to the concept we're going to think with today, which is the panopticon, which comes from Foucault's work on power and surveillance. And Foucault used the panopticon to talk about the pervasiveness of surveillance. That it's not just something that's pushing on us from the outside, but it's actually in our daily lived experiences. So what we found was that educators' choices to work with, around, or against generative AI were really impacted by who was watching them and how they were being watched. So for example, if you look at the image, the idea is that if you're on the outside in those cells, that you don't know if someone is watching you from the central tower. And this was one of the impacts on educators, that their policy and curriculum and assessment contexts, even when they're not directly being watched, they feel watched. So I'm going to introduce you to the two participants we're going to talk about today. They're both educators. So Masa was a college language instructor who was also a multilingual educator. And she teaches both English language courses and communications courses at the college level. And Henry is a high school teacher. He primarily teaches grades 9 and 12 in Ontario. And both of them, as the title of the presentation suggests, there was this element of being asked to perform the role of the detective. So if you are an educator and you've worked with students, I'm sure this is maybe something that's familiar to you, but you have to look for student AI use. And this is a role that both of these educators really resisted for two different reasons. The first reason is kind of many of the conversations that I've had with colleagues and friends about the reasons that we use AI is as a time saver, right? It saves us time, it allows us to use our energy in other places, which is great. But one of the things that came up in our conversations with these two participants was the element of AI as a labor maker. It's creating a lot of work for them. So Masa described having to go through 7 or 8 different AI detection softwares to try and figure out if she even had any credibility to challenge the student work, for example. Henry talks about having to save time and sanity, and he just was like, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not going to hunt down students to find AI, like whether they're misusing AI or not. The second reason that they chose to resist this is because it really didn't align with their values about what it means to be a teacher. So if I go back to the previous slide, Masa says it really clearly. I don't want to be a detective. That's not why I became a teacher. And she talked about having existential crisis in this group chat every week where she's like, me and my colleagues, we go, what are we doing here? We're in the wrong industry. This is not for us. And many of them have been teaching in this industry for many, many years. And so this is kind of a problem of alignment of values. She's being asked to perform this role that she really doesn't feel aligned with her values. Another thing that both of these educators share, I'm just gonna, is they share this value about preparing students for the future. They really want to make sure students have what they need to be able to go and do what they want to do in the world. However, what this led to is a lot of uncertainty because right now they don't know what the future will hold. What does it mean to teach writing in an age of generative AI? Those were questions they were asking, and their students are asking them. So one of the ways that they've kind of been thinking about this is this idea of surpassing the AI. How do we help learners surpass it, be better than it? For Masa, this was really centered about writing being a place for student voice and experiences, that's really what she valued in writing. And so she says, she talked about an example of getting students to interview people and write a profile feature. And she said, you know, if they get it to help them write interview questions, generative AI to write interview questions, that's totally fine. But if they're using it to simulate the experience of doing the interview, it's a problem. She says it's not real, right? It's not your actual experience that you're supposed to be incorporating into this assignment. And for Henry, he kind of thought about this idea of surpassing as students need to be able to do the work better than the AI. He says, if they need to surpass the capabilities of it before they can use it to fully finish their work. And for him, that's the benchmark for how much he would allow students to use AI in his classroom. So what this reveals is that what teachers really want to focus on is creative agency, learner ideas, voice, student perspectives and experiences. That's what writing is about for them. But their contexts make it hard to focus on these things and to value these things in their writing. And so I want to bring us back to this idea of the panopticon. I'm going to show you, there's a graph on the screen, and we're going to it's a pretty dense graph. Dr. Ott and I developed it together, both as a tool for analysis and also as a tool for educator self-reflection. But we're just going to look at the two bubbles on the left side. So it says where it says curriculum expectations and AI policy. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about Masa's context and then Henry's context. So for Masa, her curriculum and policy structures were very inflexible. They didn't leave her a lot of room. She was expected to teach Western conventions for academic writing. There's not a lot of flexibility in the kinds of ways that she would like to move in her pedagogy. The other thing is that her AI policy was very focused on academic integrity and making sure students are not misusing generative AI. And this puts her very firmly in the role of the detective. She doesn't really have a lot of choice about that. So this caused a lot of tension and frustration because, as we established, it's not really aligned with what she thinks the point of writing is. For Henry, there was a little bit less clarity for him about how to navigate this whole question, which in some ways we're going to talk about was difficult, and in other ways actually opened up opportunities for him to explore, oh, maybe we could have these kinds of possibilities in curriculum, in student conversation. But his department really lacked a lot of clarity. He says at one point in his conversation with me, I don't think they know what they're doing. And so I don't really know what I'm doing. And these kinds of expectations to catch students using tools were still present for him. So what I really want to illustrate in that example is that Henry and Masa were both disciplined. They were both asked to change the ways that they saw themselves and their students and writing because of the context that they were in. So for Henry, this looked like, oh, maybe I can imagine what it would look like to surpass the AI because his context allowed space for that. For Masa, there was a lot of tension and frustration and discouragement because her values as an educator were really pushing up against her curriculum and assessment context. So what I really want to bring home in this conversation is that there is a ton of work. We heard some of the work this morning about what kinds of pedagogy we can use generative AI in, how can it help us improve student experiences or educator experiences. But what I think a lot of that ignores or doesn't address is these deeper questions that educators are asking. I think in conversations with the participants, as well as with people in my colleagues and peers of mine, AI isn't just how do we adapt this technology to put it in our classroom. Teachers are asking questions about what does it mean to teach writing? What does it mean to be a writer? How do I answer that question for my students when they come to me and say, why do I have to write this? What's the point? Because AI can do it. And we'll get better at doing it. What's the point of even teaching writing? And these questions get to like a deeper philosophical almost underpinning to the ways that we move as educators. And I think if we're going to make policy recommendations or pedagogical recommendations, we have to consider that this surveillance, the power dynamics at play in our assessment, our curriculum, and our policy structures really need to be addressed before we can answer questions about how do we go about bringing this technology into our classrooms. And I think that's the invitation that these instructors ask us to consider before and after and during and as we implement these things into our contexts and have these conversations with our students. And making sure that we're really centering our values as educators and hearing the voices of students and what they need and what it looks like to prepare them for the future, even if that's uncertain now. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. And if you do have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now.